Hello everybody, NeroX, the madman from the Midwest, back again to bless your timeline with another video. And today, I haven't done a vlog video in a little while, and on this vlog show, I wanted to have a bit of a discussion as to why did both the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast bomb in the States when they did so well in Japan? Alright, now if you're not old enough to remember the early console wars of the early 1990s and late 80s, allow me to give you some background. If you're a gamer that's over the age of 35, you more than likely remember this time vividly. Let me break it down for you. After Nintendo created the Mario series and he single-handedly carried Nintendo to prominence, Sega created Sonic. This is seen as a direct challenge to both Nintendo's market share and, well, the console wars were on. Both the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo had amazing libraries ranging from the excellent, such as the original Sonic the Hedgehog trilogy, Comic Zone, and Columns for the Sega Genesis. And on the Super Nintendo side of that same coin, Chrono Trigger, Super Mario World, F-Zero, Super Metroid, and countless others, to the horrible. Both consoles did amazing here in the States and in their native Japan, and it was a really great time to be a gamer. Such fierce creativity created new and interesting ways of marketing consoles, marketing games, and countless fights on the playground were started due to the console wars of the early 1990s. Now, as the 16-bit era came to a close, both companies looked to the future and what could possibly be done with newer technology coming onto the scene. The Sega Saturn would launch in America as one of the first CD-based consoles. Okay, it wasn't the first, but it was one of the first, and it did horribly here. It did, however, do much better in Japan than it did here. The Nintendo 64 was the first of, shall we say, suspect Nintendo consoles. It was the most powerful home console available at the time, and though it had Nintendo's IP and marketing strength backing it, it didn't quite win the fifth generation of consoles out, because they both got smacked around by the PlayStation. PlayStation quickly rewrote all of the rules people thought you needed in order to have a console survive in the market in America. Now that I've given you some background information, let's get down to the hard facts. Overall, during its lifespan, the Sega Genesis sold well over 30 million units, whereas by the end of its launch year in 1995, the Sega Saturn had only sold 1.9 million units. That doesn't sound too bad, but the PlayStation sold nearly double that during its launch year. So what went wrong? Well, key factor one, marketing. Marketing can be the life or death of a console, which is what Nintendo learned the hard way with the Wii U, didn't they? But I kid. Anyway, fact is, the Sega Saturn was marketed horribly in America. And factor number two, the library. Now, one thing Nintendo did get right when they designed the N64 was that they realized that the industry was moving towards full 3D in gaming, and a track that it's still on today. So they designed the hardware of their system around that concept. PlayStation also realized it, and though they weren't anywhere near as powerful as the N64, the hardware was designed around being able to run both 2D and 3D games smoothly. This wasn't true with the Sega Saturn, which, while it did have great 2D games, some of its 3D games were, shall we say, a bit suspect at best. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Sega Saturn still had great games on it, but the majority of those great games were in 2D when the industry was going the other direction. And now that we've broken down the Sega Saturn, let's talk about the things Sega did right with the system. The only real big thing I can think of is that all the arcade ports of it were near arcade perfect. Like, the Sega Saturn got the best ports of the Marvel vs. Capcom series. I'm dead serious. Go look these ports up. They're near arcade perfect, other than a few tweaks. Whereas the PlayStation version of the Marvel vs. Capcom series always had the tag feature removed, which is near sacrilegious to fans of that series. In fact, that was one of Sega's big selling points early on in their attempt to get into the US market. They had arcade properties they could bring home, such as Streets of Rage, Shinobi, Altered Beast, what was the name of that series? Never mind, I'll remember it after I'm not recording. But anyway, Sega played to their strengths at a time when the rules for console gaming were being rewritten, and then that ended up killing the Saturn long before it should have been killed. Now that I'm done talking about what killed the Sega Saturn, let's talk about what killed the Dreamcast. Now, the Dreamcast, it seemed, made sure that Sega learned from a lot of the mistakes they had made with the Sega Saturn. The system was 128-bit. It had a lot of features that were considered ahead of its time for the time. The system launched in September of 1999 in North America, and by Christmas of that year, it had sold well over 1 million units. That's actually pretty good. It started 500,000 at launch and it had some decent games going in its launch window. Sega Sonic Adventure, the first Sonic 3D Sonic game, which has its own issues. Let's see, the first Soul Calibur game, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The Sega Dreamcast started off really strong, but much like the Sega Saturn, eventually it died way too soon. But let's look at why. 1. Piracy. Believe it or not, because of the way the Sega Dreamcast hardware was made, it was really, and I mean really, easy to pirate games or to run bootleg games on it. Heck, if you knew what you were doing, you could run Japanese imports on a US Dreamcast with ridiculous ease. And number 2, again, well, this one isn't really marketing, it's more so failure to adapt. One of Sega's biggest problems was that even though they had included a lot of features that were considered way ahead of its time in 1999, it didn't adapt to the changing gaming landscape around it. For example, the PlayStation 2, which launched after the Dreamcast, had a DVD player. Now, for those of you that don't know file formats, the DVD contains more memory than a traditional CD, which is what the Dreamcast ran. This allowed for developers for the better part of nearly 2 decades on the PlayStation 2 to create fantastic games for the system. The Dreamcast only lasted as long as CDs did, and we all know what happened to those. But that's what really, in my opinion, that's what killed both the Sega Saturn and the Sega Dreamcast. What do you think killed those two systems? Why don't you let me know in the comments below? Feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you want more. If you don't want more, then I won't make more videos. By the way, I am NeroX, the madman from the Midwest. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want more. Now I must be going. Peace.